You're listening to KOUG Radio. Listen live online at KOUGradio.org.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Sports Sex with Dom. I'm your host, Dominic Persinger, live with KOUG Radio. Today is April 13th, and I have a bunch of sports to cover for you guys, so let's jump right into it. So I've got 8 UFC predictions for you guys for UFC Kansas City. Then I have 6 first-round NBA playoff series predictions. And lastly, I'll end this with news of the day. So starting out, UFC Kansas City this Saturday is a free fight night event that will feature a top 5 featherweight matchup between Max Holloway and Arlen Allen. So let's dive right into it. There are 8 prelims and 6 fights on the main card. Here are the UFC Kansas City final 2 prelims and the breakdown for each. So starting out, we have a featherweight 125-pound fight between number 4 Brandon Royval and number 5 Mateusz Nicolau. First off, I don't know why this fight is on the prelims. Not even the final prelim either. It's the second last prelim. Makes zero sense to me. This could easily be the feature fight of the night, maybe even like the co-main event on the main card. Makes zero sense to me. But yeah, let's get into this. So Royval is 14-6, 4-2 in the UFC against all top opponents, coming off the 2-minute submission over Matt Schnell about a year ago. I think it was last May. So Royval is 30 years old, 5'9" with a 68-inch reach, and 12 of 14 of his wins come by stoppage. So he's a killer out there. He pretty much wants to get the end of the fight as soon as possible. And yeah, Royval himself has been finished twice in the UFC by Brandon Moreno and Alejandro Pantoja. So not bad losses there. You know, the top 2 guys in the division right now. He has an excellent ground game with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with 9 submissions. That's kind of his bread and butter there. He has a very high motor, like I said, high pace, wants to get out of there as soon as possible. And most of his fights do not go past the second round. So then on the other hand, Nicolau is like the complete opposite. I'll get into him in a second. So he is 19-3, 4-0 in the UFC, and he's coming off the second round KO over Matt Schnell, so similar opponent. And this was about 4 months ago. It was last December. So yeah, Nicolau is 30 years old, 5'6" with a 66-inch reach. And like I said, he's kind of the opposite of Royval. He only has 10 finishes in 19 fights. It's not like he can't finish people because he just knocked out Matt Schnell in his last fight. He's very patient with it, which is why he wins a lot of fights by decision. But while that happens, he also wins minutes within the fight. So, I'll take that if he's winning minutes. He's very well rounded, has very smooth counter kickboxing. I think he's probably one of the best counter kickboxers in the entire division. And yeah, he also has excellent Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So yeah, looking at this fight, I see Royval getting very aggressive here like he always does. And that'll play into Nicolau's favor, I think, with the counters. I can maybe see Royval getting dropped a few times like he does in a lot of fights. And this could easily end up being like fight of the night, even though it's on the prelims. I think that's funny. And once again, this should be on the main card. So yeah, Royval is tough, and I feel like he's always live for that crazy submission, so that you can't rule that out here. But so this fight could definitely go either way. But I trust Nicolau more here. He seems like he has the higher fight IQ, and I feel like this fight will go to areas where Royval threatens a finish, but Nicolau will avoid that, or he'll overcome it. And this will be a very scrappy 3 rounds. It could be a 5-round fight, honestly. It'd be an excellent 5-round fight. But yeah, Nicolau will pull out a very narrow, I want to say 29-20 decision, maybe even a split decision if one of the rounds or even a couple rounds are pretty close. So yeah, I'm going with Mateusz Nicolau by decision. So moving on to the final prelim of the night, we have a featherweight 145-pound fight between Bill Algeo and TJ Brown. So I'll start with Bill Algeo. Bill Algeo is 16-7. 3-3 in the UFC, coming off the split decision loss to Andre Fili, where people argue he probably could have won. It was a split decision. And Algeo is 2-1 in his last 3 fights, so pretty impressive in the UFC. Algeo is 33 years old, 6 foot with a 73-inch reach. And Algeo is incredibly underrated in my opinion. I think he's always been underrated in the UFC. He has very impressive wins. Like I said, he has wins over Herbert Burns. That Joe Anderson Brito win is shaping up to look pretty good from a couple of years ago. And he has win over Spike Carlisle, all quality wins. The thing with Algeo is he's not overly impressive anywhere, but he has great durability and he's just super well rounded. The durability plays a huge factor in his game. And looking at TJ Brown, he's 17-9, also 3-3 in the UFC, and he's coming off the 3rd round submission over Eric Silva. So yeah, TJ Brown is 3-1 in his last 4. And he's 32 years old, 5'9" with a 72-inch reach. And TJ Brown's a little different. He's a high-paced wrestler. who has a very high submission threat every single fight. I mean, he has 10 submissions and his 17 wins. So yeah, excellent Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu there. He's dangerous very early in fights, but I would say as the fight goes on, he tends to fade, and that's a key thing in this fight. You have like opposite gas tanks with Aljo being the higher cardio guy. So yeah, with that being said, I love Aljo in this fight. I think his durability, like I said, will benefit him huge, and it'll play a huge factor. TJ Brown's all 3 of his wins come over guys who aren't UFC caliber. 2 of them aren't in the UFC anymore, and then TJ Brown's last win versus Eric Silva a few months back. I don't think Eric Silva looked like he was UFC caliber, even though he was just debuting. I think Eric Silva came off an easy win on the Dana White Contender Series, and he got that type fight versus TJ Brown. So yeah, TJ Brown, he has 3 wins over low quality opponents. And I Bill Aljo definitely win the second and third round in this fight, as long as Brown gasses pretty much. I could see Brown maybe winning the first round, but like I said, he gets tired out in the second and third. And Aljo will definitely win the second and third if Brown's not able to land those takedowns late. And obviously you need energy to land takedowns under the wrestling. So that favors Aljo there. This will be another pretty competitive fight. I could see it going either way too, but because I can't trust TJ Brown's gas tank, I got to go with Bill Alger here. I think he wins the second and third by a 29-28 unanimous decision. So moving on to the opening up the 6-fight main card at 5:30 Pacific, we got a lightweight 155-pound fight between Rafa Garcia and Clay Guida. Garcia, he has a very impressive 15-3 record, but he's 3-3 in the UFC. All of his losses come in the UFC. He's come off a very dominant 30-27 decision over Mahashate. Garcia is 28 years old, 5'7" with a 70-inch reach. Garcia is mainly a wrestler, and I would say he has very little power in his hands. You see that every fight. Yeah, he has 8 submissions. Like I said, really good wrestler, great submission threat, but only has 1 knockout. That's saying a lot. His wrestling control time are kind of like his most impressive part of his game, and that's kind of how he wins fights. He's 3-1 in his last 4 wins, all over quality opponents. Looking at Natan Levy, who's a good wrestler, Jesse Ronson, he finished, and looking at Mahashate in his last fight. Mahashate is a great prospect of his own. And looking at Guida is one of the top veterans in the UFC just all time. He's been in the UFC since 2006, and his first fight was UFC 64. That is so long ago, because never at UFC 288. That's just the pay-per-views too. That's not including all the free fight nights. So there have been a lot of fights since Clay Guida's been in the UFC. So Guida's 38-19. Coming up on 60 fights, 60 pro fights, and he's 18-16 in the UFC, coming off the decision win over Scott Holtzman 4 months ago. And yeah, Guida's 41 years old, so that 60 fights makes sense because he's 41, and he's also 5'7" with a 70-inch reach. And yeah, he's also mainly a wrestler with only 6 knockouts and 39 wins. And Clay has an excellent gas tank, I would say, and he could easily push this fight for 3 rounds. He is pretty old for the division, being 41. That's old for 155. But he still has very fast feet, high pace, high speed throughout the entire fight. That's just kind of Clay's thing for his entire career. He's just a high paced guy. So as soon as he loses that, he should probably retire. So looking at this fight, this will not be an easy fight by any means for Garcia, but he definitely should be the one who actually wins this fight. Both guys lack just sheer power on their feet in the boxing. But if I were to decide with one, I got to go with Garcia here. Garcia is still only 28 years old, versus a 41-year-old. That's a huge advantage. And, he should have the better wrestling throughout the fight, I'd say, being, having the youth on the older guy. I think maybe Hoffa gets tired later in the fight, because Hoffa has proven to get tired in previous fights, but I like him to probably win the first 2 rounds. Maybe Clay Guida makes something interesting happen in the 3rd round, but like I said, I like Hoffa in those first 2 rounds. That's so crazy. Guida's still fighting at 41, but I think Garcia is a level above Guida at this point in their careers, especially because Guida's coming off, just a split decision win and a loss before that. And the fact that Guida's been exposed by high-level grapplers in the past, and Hoffa is a high-level grappler. So, yeah, I see Garcia winning this fight. Probably another boring decision, but it'll be 29-28 in Garcia's favor. I'm moving up the main card. We got bantamweight 135-pound fight. We got number 9 Pedro Munoz taking on number 13 Chris Gutierrez. So Munoz is 19-7-2, and he's 9-7-2 in the UFC. Those two no contests are overturned, and it was a win that was overturned to steroids. And then it was an eye poke from Sean O'Malley in his last fight. And then he's coming off the second round no contest accidental eye poke, like I said. So he's 36 years old, 5'6" with a 65-inch reach, and he's 1-4-1 in his last 6. But in that 1-4-1 in those last 6, he has lost, high level competition. You're looking at like Aljamain Sterling, Jose Aldo, Dominic Cruz, Frankie Edgar, all former champs or the current champ. He's a great wrestler with smart and calculated striking. He's a respected veteran with a resume of impressive names. And then looking at Gutierrez, Gutierrez is 19-3-2 with those 2 being draws, and he's 7-1-1 in the UFC, coming off the 2-minute knockout over Frankie Edgar. And Gutierrez is a lot younger. He's 31 years old, and he's 5'9" with a 67-inch reach. And he's 4-0 in his last 5, which is 4-0-1 in his last 5, which is super impressive. And his only loss in the UFC is to Hani Barcelos. Yeah, so Gutierrez, he's a fantastic kickboxer, and he's probably some of the best lower leg kicks I've ever seen, probably in the division. He's probably some of the best low kicks, in the entire UFC. And then his game plan is pretty much always come forward, throw lots of jabs, lots of leg kicks. He also has a 70% takedown defense, which is huge because he kind of forces guys, to box with him. And looking at this fight itself, I think Gutierrez should be the better fighter in this fight. I feel like this is similar to Rafa Garcia Clay Guida fight before this, where it's 2 guys kind of moving in opposite directions. One is near retirement, and Pedro Munhoz is one is kind of just getting started. I do worry about Munhoz because he could get some takedowns, end up winning like a round or 2. But I think this will be a clear fight if they box for most of it. I'm calling in like a 30-27, maybe a 29-28 decision for Gutierrez and a very convincing win. So yeah, moving on to the next fight, we got light heavyweight 205, Tanner Boser versus Ian Cutelaba. So yeah, Tanner Boser, he's 29-1 with that 1 being a draw, and he's 4-4 in the UFC, coming off a split decision loss to Rodriguez Nascimento. And Boser's 31 years old, 6'2" with a 75-inch reach, and he's 1-3 in his last 4 at heavyweight, but 2 of those losses are split decision. And yeah, he has great power in his hands, and this is the first fight down at 205, and it previously was at 265, like I said, but he was fairly undersized, so it makes sense that he's coming back down to light heavyweight. And then his last 3 wins in the UFC are all by knockout, and he has decent wrestling, but not a strong ground game. I would say he actually has a pretty weak ground game. So yeah, moving on to Cutelaba. Cutelaba is 16-9-1, also with a draw, and he's 5-8-1 in the UFC with 3 straight finish losses and a knockout loss to Kenny Nishchuku. And Cutelaba is 29 years old, 6'1" with a 75-inch reach, and he's 1-5-1 in his last 7. That's very unfortunate. It's not quite like Pedro Munhoz where he's losing the top guys in the world. He's losing the guys who are lower in the top 15. Cutelaba is a great grappler, but he has 0 chin. He's been knocked out 3 times, and he's been submitted 4 times. He's a great first-round fighter, but he gasses throughout the fight usually. Usually he's just good for 1 round, very dangerous for 1 round on the mat. But if he can't get that finish in the first round, he's probably not going to win the fight. He does have very underrated hands, I would say, where he has 12 knockouts of his own and 16 wins. And looking at this fight itself, usually I'd like Cutelaba in the spot, but he's looked so bad in his last 3 fights. Like usually this would be like a no-brainer. Cutelaba's going to win it, but I think if Boser can survive the first round, then he'll be able to wear on Cutelaba. Such a tough pick. This is probably the toughest pick on the card, you guys. The fact Boser's coming down from heavyweight means we'll have more, more size and power advantage, but it's really tough because the only path to victory I see for Cutelaba is an early finish. But it's also really hard because, Boser has terrible grappling, so I could see Cutelaba expose that, especially because Cutelaba's coming down. I know he's lost 3 in a row, but he's losing to the ranked guys. Boser's not a ranked guy in the light heavyweight division. And Boser's only been finished once 8 years ago, and he's never been submitted, but it's also against like lower level grapplers. I did think I like Boser in the spot, but I could see Cutelaba exposing the grappling of Boser and maybe getting like a first or second round finish. Yeah, I was originally gonna pick Bozer, but I think I'm gonna go with Kutilava. I think he'll beat Bozer before he tires out. Then moving on to the feature fight of the night, we got a light heavyweight fight. Number 13, Dustin Jacoby versus number 15, Azamat Murzakanov. Starting with Jacoby, he's 18-6-1 with that one being a draw. A lot of draws on this card. But he's 6-1-1 in the UFC, coming off the highly controversial loss to number 14, Khalil Roundtree. He's 35 years old, 6'3" with a 76-inch reach, and he had 4 straight wins before his last fight where he was absolutely robbed, and he should have won on the scorecards. I think he won his last fight. I mean, he outboxed Roundtree in the entire 3 rounds, every single round. I'm glad they kept him in the rankings, though. I mean, above Roundtree, which shows that they know that he probably won that fight. But he should get a top 10 opponent next, which shows that because he was robbed in his last fight, he wasn't able to get that top 10 opponent. Has to fight, number 15. But yeah, Jacoby's game, he's an excellent kickboxer and has excellent kickboxing background where he was number 2 in the world at one point. I don't know a lot of people know this, but he actually fought Alex Pereira in kickboxing. Unfortunately, Alex Pereira beat him in a glory kickboxing title match, but just showing that Dustin Jacoby is a world-class kickboxer. Now he's in the UFC for a while now. Now looking at Murzakanov, he's 12-0, 2-0 in the UFC, coming off the 3rd round knockout over Devin Clark and a 3rd round knockout before that over Tofan Nezachukui. Murzakanov is 34 years old, but I do have to say, I've seen his age listed at 3 different places, differently 3 different times. I've seen 33, 34, 36, so I'm not sure on his age. Can't confirm that, but we'll go with 34 here. And he's 5'10 with a 71-inch reach. And among his 12 wins, 10 of them come by finish with 9 knockouts. So this guy is also an excellent kickboxer. I do have to say, though, his 12-0 is not a crazy 12-0. I think he fought really bad talent outside the UFC, which kind of helped mold his record and make it look very flashy. I do think his knockout over Devin Clark in his last fight was pretty impressive because Devin Clark is a great fighter of his own. But I mean, he was losing most of that fight in his debut to Tofan, and his kickboxing is good, but there's nothing that really stands out with them, especially being 12-0. Usually with undefeated fighters, you usually want to see something that stands out. So yeah, this is a great style matchup that I think plays in the favor of Jacoby here. I mean, Jacoby is a huge 6-3 for the division, and Murzakanov is actually undersized for the division at 205. Yeah, Murzakanov kind of thrives off pressuring and backing up, the stockier, shorter guys, but Jacoby being 6'3", he'll have plenty of length and he'll overmatch him pretty much. This will probably end up being a very frustrating fight for Murzakanov, being 12-0. He hasn't fought a guy quite like this. I think he'll struggle dealing with the range and the striking. I think this will be a very highly technical clinic for Dustin Jacoby, kind of like in his last fight where he should have won. And I'm going with the 30-27 dominant decision for Jacoby, where he wins all 3 rounds. Moving on to the co-main event, a featherweight 145-pound fight. We got number 14, Edson Barbosa versus number 15. I'm sorry, not number 15. Billy Cortillo is not ranked, but he's right on the cusp of being ranked if he wins this fight. Barbosa is 21-11, 16-11 in the UFC, and he's been around since 2010 in the UFC. And he's come off the decision loss a year ago to Bryce Mitchell. And Barbosa, he's an aging 37 years old, and he's 5'11 with 75-inch reach. And Barbosa is 3-7 in his last 10 UFC fights, so he's definitely declining. He's an outstanding Brazilian kickboxer with 13 knockouts. He carries lots of power. He has very impressive knockouts in the UFC. He has knockout over Shane Burgos, Dan Hooker, Beneil Dariush. The list goes on. Dan's obviously had some wars too, where even if he's lost, they're still impressive fights. But with Dan Ige, Paul Felder, Kevin Lee, he's fought Khabib Nurmagomedov. The list goes on. Like I said, Barbosa is a UFC legend, and unfortunately, never actually challenged for a belt, which doesn't make sense. And looking at Corin Till on the other side, Corin Till is 17-4, 5-2 in the UFC, coming off the 2nd round knockout over Alexander Hernandez 4 months ago. So he's 34 years old, 5'10 with a 70-inch reach, and in his last 5 fights, he has 3 knockouts. Billy has great durability. That's all I've always noticed in all his fights, and he has some of the best output in the entire division. And that's saying something when you have guys like Max Holloway and Volkanovski in your division. He's only been knocked out once, and that was 6 years ago, so I kind of put that aside. I don't think Corin Till is going to get knocked out here. And yeah, he hasn't been finished other than that. He actually has wrestling in his back pocket too. He has a little bit of a wrestling background. I don't think people realize that because he has a very high output on the feet in boxing. But yeah, he also has wrestling that he tries to mix in when he can. And yeah, he tends to have a very high pace throughout the fight where He brings lots of pressure, mixes in the wrestling, high output on the feet. He's very entertaining because of this style. So looking at this fight, even though Billy's striking isn't quite as technical as Barbosa, I think he should win this fight. His high-paced offense should win minutes, and I think he'll probably wear down the aging Barbosa. I don't see Barbosa winning minutes in this fight or having a higher output. He definitely will not have an higher output. I think Barbosa could be pretty competitive early, which is why I think this is still a great co-main event. It could be pretty competitive. But I don't like the fact that Barbosa is coming off a year-long layoff. I don't like that at all. A lot of people are high on Barbosa in this fight as the underdog pick this week, but I understand that because this is the best fighter Billy has ever faced. But kind of similar to many other fights on this card, these guys are trending in different directions. Barbosa is trending downwards, probably, within 3 fights of retirement, and you're looking at Billy who's fighting for his first top 15 ranking in his career. So yeah, Barbosa will be live in round 1, but I like Billy here. Billy Q will use his wrestling to wear down Edson over the first couple rounds. Maybe the first round will be pretty competitive, but then I can see a 3rd round ground and pound knockout by Billy Quarantillo. So yeah, give me Billy Quarantillo in this fight. Yeah, moving on to the main event for UFC Kansas City. We got an outstanding top 5 featherweight 145-pound matchup between number 2 Max Holloway and number 4 Arnold Allen. So we'll start with Max. Max is 23-7, 19-7 in the UFC, and he's been around since 2010 in the UFC, so also a UFC veteran. But somehow he's only 31 years old. Doesn't make sense. So yeah, he's coming off the title shot loss to Alexander Volkanovski. Yeah, so he has a ton of fights in the UFC. 26 fights. Will be his 27th fight in the UFC, and only 31 years old. That's insane. He's 5'11" with a 69-inch reach, and Max, as many know, he's one of the best featherweights of all time. He has title fight wins over Anthony Pettis, Jose Aldo, Brian Ortega, Frankie Edgar too. All legends of the game. And he was 5-0 in featherweight title fights. That's a big deal before losing 3 in a row to Alexander Volkanovski. It just shows how great Volk is. But yeah, he has the most impressive striking differential in the UFC of 7-4 ratio. He's landing 7 on his opponent every minute, while his opponent's only landing 4 strikes on him. That's a very impressive ratio. And he also has a very high 85% takedown defense, forcing fighters to box with him, which you don't want to box with Max Holloway, especially for 5 rounds. And he has the highest output and probably also the best durability of any fighter I've ever seen in the UFC. And his last 7 fights have all gone to a 5-round decision, and he somehow has never been knocked out. I think his relentless style makes him probably, like I said, the toughest guy in the UFC, in my opinion. I'm moving on to the British man, Arnold Allen. So he is 19-1, 10-0 in the UFC, and he's coming off knockout wins over Calvin Kattar and Dan Hooker. And his Dan Hooker knockout was legit. It was only a couple minutes. Though the Calvin Kattar knockout in his last fight, Calvin Kattar tore his knee, and when they fought in December, and the blown knee pretty much ended the fight. So it wasn't a legit knockout. But Arnold Allen was winning that fight. We'll give him credit for that. Arnold Allen is 29 years old, 5'8" with a 70-inch reach. And I'm glad he's finally getting a fight like this. He's been very underrated for a while and gets no credit for being 10-0 in the UFC. I think it has a lot to do with because he had a few periods with an inactivity. Obviously fighters need to fight at least twice a year to gain some attraction and some attention. But yeah, Arnold Allen, he's some of the fastest hands I've ever seen. Super quick hands. He's nasty boxing combos. He isn't afraid to make it ugly either. He has a sneaky grappling game with a couple submissions in the UFC as well. So yeah, looking at this fight, Max Holloway should totally win this fight in a 5-round decision. If this were a 3-round fight, I'd absolutely pick Arnold Allen, but unfortunately it's not. This fight could go to a decision, and Max pretty much has the 4th and 5th rounds locked because of his experience in those championship rounds. Arnold Allen has never seen a 5-round fight. He's never been even in a 5-round fight to begin with. And Max has pretty much made it home for them, like I said, in his last 7 fights. I don't see Allen being able to wear down Max enough to avoid, losing those later rounds. So I can't see Allen winning those later rounds. Maybe Allen could win the 1st and 2nd rounds, because he starts out hotter. But he's going to get tired, man. Max's high output late is easily going to win him some rounds, which kind of guarantees him, half the fight. And I don't see either guy getting knocked out for the first time here. Both guys lack actually sheer power. They're more volume guys. I haven't seen Allen fight 5 rounds, but he could prove me wrong. But I'm going to trust the guy who I've been able to see go 5 rounds, and Max. And he's gone 5 rounds with some of the best in the world versus Arnold Allen, and we have not seen that. I'm going with Max Holloway by a 48, or sorry, I'm going to go with the 49-46 decision. I think he wins rounds 2 through 5. I think maybe Arnold Allen wins either 1 or 2. But yeah, I just think, I think Arnold Allen wins one of the first 3 rounds, and Max is guaranteed 4 and 5, and he'll probably win 2 of the first 3 rounds. So yeah, Max Holloway, 49-46 decision in the main event. Now let's head over to the NBA really quick, where we got the first round of the playoffs to kick off this Saturday. Unfortunately, the final playing games aren't until tomorrow night, so we don't know the 8 seeds right now for the playoffs. But with that being said, I can't do a breakdown for the 1 versus 8 seed first round matchups. Since we do know the 2 versus 7, 3 versus 6, and 4 versus 5 matchups in each conference, I'll break down each of those 6-7 game series. Before I push the 1 seeds aside and the Denver Nuggets and Milwaukee Bucks, I think they'll for sure advance through the first round, no matter who they face. So yeah, with that being said, let's move on to the 6 series that are set up as of now. Now, starting off at 10 a.m. Pacific on Saturday, we got number 3 Philadelphia 76ers versus number 6 Brooklyn Nets. I think this will probably be a tougher matchup than most people imagine. The Nets have a much tougher defensive team since the trade deadline, obviously, where they acquired some decent role players. I just think the 76ers have high hopes, and even losing the second round would be disappointing. So that's the big thing to note here. The Sixers, they've had so many scoring weapons, and that'll also be huge in this series. Like, they obviously have the MVP front runner and scoring champ who's going to carry them, and Joel Embiid. Then you have, guards, Tyrese Maxey, you got James Harden, Tobias Harris, who are all capable scorers, and they can give you 15, 20 a night easily, maybe even more. And they also have a decent scoring off the bench. You have guys like Shake Milton, you got Niang. I just don't think the Nets will be able to keep up in this series. The Nets heavily rely on Mikal Bridges, and while I think he's a great scorer and defender, I don't think it's going to be that easy to score in the playoffs for him. I don't think he's like a number 1 scorer option in a playoff series. I see the Sixers forcing the Nets to have lots of other guys score throughout the series, but I don't trust the Brooklyn Nets in that situation. Plus, the Sixers obviously, they have way higher goals in the situation, while the Nets are borderline kind of rebuilding since trading Durant and Kyrie and Harden. I like the Sixers in the series. I like them winning 4-2. So next on Saturday, we got number 2 Boston Celtics versus number 7 Atlanta Hawks at 12:30. Yeah, I don't think this series is going to be close at all. I think the Hawks were the most average team all year. I think they literally spent the whole season pretty much 500. I think they broke the NBA record for most games spent at 500 in the season. They were the definition of average this season. And the Celtics literally have the same roster from the finals last year, and that they could easily get back there. So that's a big difference in teams. You're talking like 57 wins and I believe 41 or 42 wins. That's a huge difference. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, they've both elevated their games even more scoring-wise this year, which is going to benefit the Celtics throughout the playoffs. I think Trae Young will be huge throughout this series, but I don't think he'll be able to keep up with 2 All-Stars on the other team in the Boston Celtics. Plus, the Celtics have the deeper bench and a better defense. That'll play a huge advantage. I think Tatum's he's going to torch this Atlanta defense, and he's going to average like 35 a night, I bet. This will be a pretty quick series. I wouldn't be shocked if Boston went up 3-0, but I'm going to call Boston goes up 2-0 at home, and it goes back to Atlanta, and Trae Young has a big night, bringing it to 2-1. He wants to avoid that 3-0 where it kind of ends the series. I think Boston wins a convincing Game 4 at Atlanta to make it 3-1, and then Boston comes home in Game 5 and closes it out in 5 games. So yeah, I trust Boston in this series, and I expect them to go on another deep playoff run. So yeah, give me Boston in 5 games, 4-1. And at 3 o'clock on Saturday, it's Game 1 of the number 4 Cleveland Cavaliers versus number 5 New York Knicks. So people have a lot of love for the Knicks this year, and I'm not on that side at all. I think the Cavs are so much better. They have legit stars. I've never bought the whole hype with Jalen Brunson, Julius Randle. Jalen Brunson's a 2-way liability, I think, and then Julius Randle is like, he's the most unskilled star I've ever seen. Like I think he's a star, but his ball handling is so questionable. His shot selection is questionable. He's not a legitimate star. He's not a star that's going to carry a team throughout the playoffs. And then you're comparing that to Mitchell and Garland, who are arguably the best scoring backcourt duo in the league. And the fact they also have Karis LeVert is huge off the bench. They have 3 legit scoring guards. And then you have Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, who are borderline all-stars inside the paint. They're going to dominate the paint here. I just don't see how the Knicks are supposed to even keep up with this team. They're not going to stop this team either. I think the Cavs should have an easy time in this series, and I'm not a huge fan of Julius Randle. I don't trust him in a playoff series either. I see the Cavs closing the series out in 5 games, kind of like the Celtics, and I think Mitchell will have a huge series, and he'll average probably about 30 a game. Then moving on to the final game on Saturday, it's at 5:30. It's the number 3 Sacramento Kings versus the number 6 Golden State Warriors. I love the Warriors to upset the Kings here, which really isn't an upset. I think the Warriors are actually favored to win the series anyway as a 6th seed. So yeah, in Steve Kerr's tenure as head coach of the Warriors, he's never lost a series in the Western Conference. Or he's never lost a series before the finals. The Warriors are defending the champs, and they're not losing the first round, especially this time around. Maybe they'll lose the first round a couple years from now, but they're not losing right now, especially the Kings. Let me get into the Kings really quick. So the Kings have obviously had a phenomenal regular season, but where they clinched the playoffs as the 3 seed for the first time in 16 years, and in their playoff drought of 16 years. Super cool for a Kings fan. But there's just a couple things that kind of come off as red flags for the team. And the first one is the fact that this team has such a little amount of playoff experience. Aside from Harrison Barnes, who won 1 title with Golden State, and Kevin Huerter, who had a couple series played in Atlanta, De'Aaron Fox, Davion Mitchell, Malik Monk, and Keegan Murray, they've never played in the postseason, not one single game. And half their rotation is new to this. Not to mention, Sabonis, he's never made it past the first round. I believe he's only played in the playoffs 2 or 3 times. Most of their team is like that. Most of their team is, if they have played in the playoffs, they've only played once or twice, and they haven't gone past the first round. Yeah, the second red flag I see is the fact that it just was the healthiest team in the league. I know that sounds kind of dumb, but their health was the only thing that separated them among all the loaded West. All of their starters missed less than 10 games, and that's going to win you a few more games than other teams. So yeah, I just bring this up because the Warriors are fully healthy now, and had they been all season, then they'd probably be a 3 seed in this scenario. So yeah, the Kings benefited being healthy all throughout the regular season, but unfortunately for them, most teams are healthy in the playoffs. And a healthy Warriors team, with Steph, Clay, Draymond, and Poole, they're not losing this series. The Warriors also would have been higher in the seeding if they had 1 more road games. I think they had the 2nd worst road game record this year. That won't be a problem in the series, to be honest. Sacramento isn't far from the Bay. I've heard there will be a lot of Warriors fans for the Sacramento home game. So pretty much Warriors are getting pretty much neutral site and home games for most of the games in this series. I love the Warriors to win this series. I think Klay Thompson has a big series after leading the league in threes throughout the season. I feel like he's fully returned to his old self, and that's a big deal. I like Golden State to win this series in 6 games, 4-2. So moving on to Sunday's game 1s. First at noon, we have number 2 Memphis Grizzlies versus number 7 LA Lakers. I like the Lakers to pull off the upset of the series. This Lakers roster isn't super deep, but I think guys like Russell, Beasley, Anthony Davis, LeBron, they all have way more playoff experience than this Grizzlies team. People forget Beasley was on those Denver Nuggets teams that were going deep in the playoffs in the past. And then I don't think the Grizzlies are going to be able to keep up in the front court and, down Steven Adams and Brandon Clark for the playoffs. They're going to rely heavily on Jaren Jackson Jr. for this entire series. And the fact that Jaren Jackson fouls out a lot is very concerning. I don't see him stopping Rui, LeBron, Anthony Davis. He's not going to be able to stop all of them. I see the Lakers having success versus this Memphis team, even though they're the 7th seed. I do worry Memphis has more shooting than them, but that's kind of a what if, I guess, because they have to make their shots. Even though the Lakers are an underdog, it's hard to kind of rule them out, especially with LeBron this early in the playoffs historically. This is going to be one of the closest first-round series, and I see these 2 teams splitting the first 2 games in Memphis, then the next 2 in LA, so it's 2-2. I can see LA somehow stealing that game 5, Memphis steals game 6, and it's 3-3. And I think it comes down to that highly anticipated game 7. My gut always hits with LeBron in game 7s, and I think he'll hit some clutch shots and pull off the upset. You heard it here. Los Angeles Lakers are pulling off the first round upset in 7 games. I'm calling it. Not that crazy of an upset because obviously the media is obviously very high on the Lakers every year, but I'm not usually very personally high on the Lakers, so I'm going to call they actually get to the first round this year. So next at 5 o'clock on Sunday, and the last breakdown I'll have for you guys. The 1s and 8 seeds do play on Sunday as well, but like I said, I will not have a breakdown for that today because the 8 seeds have not been confirmed. It's the number 4 Phoenix Suns versus number 5 LA Lakers. I'm very stumped on this series. I think this is the closest first round series. I think this will be the closest series and probably one of the craziest series in the entire playoffs, just because these teams, they're so evenly matched, and it's kind of crazy that one of these teams has to lose in the first round. Either Kawhi Leonard or Kevin Durant's not going to be in the second round of the playoffs. That is mind-boggling. I think it's really challenging to gauge these teams because, you have Chris Paul, Durant, Booker, Kawhi Leonard, and Paul George, who've all missed 25 plus games. So it's really hard to predict a series when you haven't seen like nearly a full season of either team. I want to try and put trust in Durant for joining a powerful contender, but then it's hard to count out Kawhi when he's been notoriously excellent in the playoffs. I don't think it'll come down to how well I think it will come down to how well DeAndre Ayton plays and how he contributes, versus Zubac. I think we'll have that easy advantage over Zubac. And the wings are pretty much even here, and I think both teams play excellent defense. I think I may side with the Clippers here because I like their role depth. No, actually, I think the Suns have the role have more depth here. I like Torrey Craig, Terrence Ross, Landry Shamet, Campaign. They got way more guards. They have way more shot makers, and they're all going to play big minutes. I think for the Clippers, they're going to need someone like Westbrook or Norman Powell to step up, but I trust a trio of Durant, Booker, and Ayton to outscore whatever the contribution is from Westbrook or something. I think they'll be able to outscore them the entire series. They brought in Durant for a reason. This team's going to be way better than where the Nets were at. And I think home court advantage obviously is always huge. It's going to be huge here. I'll go with the Suns in 7 games, 4-3, where it's very tight. They're going back and forth. Maybe it goes 1-1, 2-2, 3-3, but I think the Suns close it out in 7 games at home. That home court will be huge. So now for some news of the day to close out the show. First news of the day is a boxing announcement. I don't usually cover boxing in the show, but I thought I'd share this announcement. So Nate Diaz is officially out of the UFC as of the end of 2022. And it's official that Diaz will now be moving to boxing and his opponent will be Jake Paul. This whole celebrity boxing thing is funny to me. I'm honestly just glad to see some of these retired UFC guys making easy money after, having way harder fights in the UFC. Nate Diaz will probably make more money in this fight than almost every one of his UFC fights, probably minus the McGregor fights. And I think it's also nice here because he gets to, do it against like a guy who isn't a high level boxer in Jake Paul. So very nice to see. I think, Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz will be a fun fight. I think there will be a lot of funny smack talk throughout the week in the build-up. I'm not giving a prediction for this whatsoever. I don't care enough for this, and boxing is rigged anyway. But congrats to Nate Diaz for getting this lucrative opportunity. And Jake Paul is a joke for fighting another retired MMA fighter in their late 30s. Like, why can't you fight a guy who's... I guess he fought Tommy Fury, that's fair, but he should fight another guy like Tommy Fury. So yeah, sticking in the combat sports world, but moving over to the side I prefer, the UFC made a huge announcement yesterday. So Brandon Moreno, the flyweight champ, will be defending his belt against Alejandro Pantoja this July in Las Vegas, and they'll be for UFC 290. So yeah, this is a great title matchup, and I think we all kind of saw this coming because we knew Pantoja last summer was gonna be next in line for the title, and then after the flyweight title was settled between Figueiredo and Moreno 3 months ago, it was kind of obvious that the winner was going to get Pantoja prior this summer. So this will be a super competitive fight. I think people were really high on Moreno here, but I think it'll be closer to people think, considering Pantoja's beat Moreno in the past. And yeah, it's a cool rematch, and considering the challenger has beat Moreno before, like I said. Both guys have world-class grappling, so this is going to be a high-level fight, very technical. I wish they had this in the June pay-per-view, however. I feel like I keep hearing awesome fights get added to the July pay-per-view card, but none are being added to the 289 in June. Like, that's UFC Vancouver, British Columbia, like I said last week, and I want to attend that card, so it sucks when they keep adding the good fights after the Vancouver card. Like, please add it to the June card, you guys. UFC, what are you doing? But yeah, still, Moreno versus Pantoja, awesome matchup. I'm glad the UFC announced this because every UFC fan has been waiting for it. Now, closing out the news of the day with some NFL news. This is with the New York Giants, my beloved team. So star running back Saquon Barkley has not signed his franchise tag 1-year contract with the team, making him ineligible to participate in off-season programs that begin next Monday. Yeah, this is just a big deal because it means Saquon is willing to hold out and not play for now. He's very upset with his franchise tag a little bit. I think he was upset he wasn't given that 3 or 4 year lucrative contract. But the Giants and Saquon were not seeing eye to eye here with numbers. And that's a huge problem. And you don't want to give someone a contract you regret like very quickly. The Giants obviously felt they'd give Saquon the 1 year tag to see how he does this season. Maybe extend him after the season or let him go. I understand what the Giants are doing here because you can't throw a bunch of money at a running back, who's only 2 years post knee surgery, and he's not necessarily he's not inclining his career right now. I don't see him getting better necessarily. He's probably gonna decline in the next couple of years. It sucks. Saquon feels undervalued here. I hope he's back on the team, but I understand the Giants from a money standpoint. I hope he signs the franchise tag so he's back for at least 1 more year to kind of prove his worth. Otherwise, I guess he'll probably likely hold out all of next season. That'd be very unfortunate. So yeah, enjoy the NBA playoffs this weekend, and the UFC fights this Saturday. And I'll be back on Tuesday live at 1 o'clock. Thanks for tuning in to Sports Takes with Dom. I'm your host, Dom Persinger, live for the KOUG Radio.